Hey everyone, it's Sevi. After 2 years of waiting, Baizhu is finally playable as a 5-star Dendro Catalyst user, so in this guide, we'll dive into his kit, talents, constellations, artifacts, weapons, and team comps to help you understand how to best utilize him. Let's get into it!
Hello, I am Baizhu, a practitioner of medicine at Boo Boo Pharmacy. So, are you experiencing any discomfort?
As the doctor he is, Baizhu's kit is focused on keeping your team alive with his solid healing and interesting shielding capabilities, along with his Dendro application and damage buff. He's mostly suited to an off-field support role, but also has potential to be played as an on-fielder. With these, Baizhu consolidates helpful supportive utilities and is a flexible unit for many Dendro-based comps. Let's take a closer look at his talents. Baizhu's Catalyst attacks give your enemies a painful acupressure session and deal Dendro damage. This gives him the potential to be an on-field Dendro driver and applicator. But one consideration is that his attack's range is very short, so much so that you can treat him almost like a melee unit. The hits also have a very small AoE, where it's possible to hit multiple enemies if they're grouped really closely, but for the most part, they're single-target attacks. He also has a charged attack that rains down an AoE Dendro hit. This has a separate ICD from his normal attacks, which can help get in extra application, but the animation is a bit slow and the stamina cost is 50, so use his charged attack sparingly. If you plan to use him on field, just understand that his normal attacks application and damage will be very single target oriented. Otherwise, Baizhu stays off field for the most part, supporting the team with his other abilities. Baizhu's skill is very straightforward for Dendro application, healing, and particle generation. Casting it unleashes a Dendro sprite that can hit up to 3 times, whether it's one target or between multiple enemies. This follows standard ICD, so if multiple enemies get hit, it applies Dendro to them once, since ICD is counted separately per entity. But if one enemy takes all 3 hits, then it only applies Dendro once due to the ICD rule. It also generates 3 to 4 particles upon hitting an enemy, which Baizhu uses to battery himself, and upon returning, it heals your party based on Baizhu's max HP. This skill has a 10-second cooldown, but it depends on your team how often you can use it. In quick swap-like teams with more freedom to swap between characters, you can likely use it twice in a rotation. But in teams where an on-field carry is preventing you from switching freely, like with Sino, Baizhu may only be able to use his skill once per rotation. How often you can cast his skill affects his healing and application frequency, but more so it affects his energy needs, which we'll get to later in the build section. Then, casting Baizhu's burst makes the active character gain the pulsing clarity state for 14 seconds. During this state, he creates a seamless shield every 2.5 seconds, and there are a couple of things to note about it. For starters, this shield is based on Baizhu's max HP, and as a Dendro shield, it can absorb more Dendro damage. Still, the shield itself is quite flimsy, since its absorption multiplier is not that high. However, a new shield is created every 2.5 seconds, and the shield heals the active character and deals Dendro damage to a target if any of these conditions are met. 1. If a new shield is generated while the previous one still exists. 2. If the shield is shattered by enemy attacks. And 3. When the shield expires at the end of the burst duration. Like his normal attacks, the shield's hits are pretty single target, with a very small AoE that can damage multiple closely grouped enemies. Every hit can also apply Dendro regardless of the conditions that generated the hit. But aside from healing and damage, another important function of this shield is how it helps you completely resist any interruption or stagger effects while it's active. And even if the enemy's hit destroys the shield, it will still prevent that hit staggering your character. Since the shield is periodically renewed, it provides reliable interruption resistance. Just don't mistake it for a dedicated shield replacement, as you'll still want to dodge or iframe enemy attacks since it will periodically have downtime too. Furthermore, Baizhu has 2 Ascension passives that improve his support utility. For his first Ascension passive, Baizhu gains either effects depending on the active character's HP. If it's less than 50%, Baizhu will gain a healing bonus to improve his heals. If it's 50% or above, Baizhu will gain a Dendro damage bonus to boost his own damage. Basically, you're either getting more healing or more damage. And for his 4th Ascension passive, characters healed by Baizhu's shield will get a reaction bonus for Dendro-related reactions based on Baizhu's HP. This maxes out at 50,000 HP from Baizhu, so the highest it can give give is a 100% bonus to Bloom, Hyper Bloom, and Burgeon damage, and a 40% bonus to Aggravate and Spread damage. So not only does building Baiju's HP increase his healing and shield health, it also helps buff your team's Dendro-related reaction damage. The buff lasts for 6 seconds, and it can be refreshed for one main on-field unit, or it can linger even after the buff character swaps off-field. In quick swap teams, it's possible to switch between characters for Baiju's shield to buff them separately. Either way, this is a good passive for Baizhu to have additional offensive support utility. And for his unique exploration passive, whenever you pick up a harvestable item, Baizhu heals the active character based on his max HP. So to summarize, Baiju's kit is really geared towards supporting your team with healing, shielding, and a reaction damage buff. In this regard, he does quite well and makes battles comfortable. His off-field Dendro application is also respectable for keeping up a Dendro aura and triggering reactions when possible. And since his shield follows your character, his Dendro application is more mobile compared to other units whose Dendro application is largely limited to an area or has to be swapped in to reapply Dendro. Although in multi-target scenarios, it might struggle due to his largely single-targeting mechanics. Alternatively, Baizhu can also be used as an on-field driver thanks to his Catalyst Dendro attacks. Again, his normal attacks are single-target and very close range, so there are scenarios where it can be sufficient and others where it'll be less effective. Regardless of his playstyle, the biggest consideration is his energy, since most of his utility comes from his burst. If you don't have sufficient energy generation, your rotations with Baizhu can struggle and make him feel worse to play. Getting ample ER and securing your energy sources will be an important aspect of building him and his teams. These factors can help you determine how to adapt Baizhu in various scenarios. For his talents, prioritize his skill and burst as they are the main sources of his damage, healing, and shielding multipliers. For the normal attacks, you can leave them alone or level them up too if you plan to use him as an on-field unit. Increasing his character level will also help a lot to maximize his base HP and reaction damage. Baizhu already feels complete at C0, but let's see what his Constellations add to his kit. C1 simply gives Baizhu a second charge on his skill. This translates to extra particles, healing, and Dendro application. The most important benefit is that it lets you build less ER on him, which is his biggest issue. It's a general quality of life constellation, but just know that even at C0, there are still ways to fulfill his energy needs, so don't view C1 as being necessary. Both skill charges also have a shared cooldown, so in quick swap teams you may be able to get in 3 skill procs in the first rotation, but afterwards you'll be limited again to 2 skill procs, which is pretty similar to a C0, which makes it have little to no value. Its most valuable use is in teams where Baizhu can only use his skill at the start of the rotation. C2 gives Baizhu even more off-field presence by releasing a mini sprite to deal Dendro damage and heal. This is considered elemental skill damage and can trigger every 5 seconds when the active character hits an enemy. That's another source of Dendro application and healing. C3 boosts his burst level by 3, improving its shield health, healing, and damage. C4 gives the party a simple 80 EM buff for 15 seconds after using his burst, which is an overall boost in team damage. C5 boosts his skill level by 3, improving its healing and damage. And finally, his C6 adds to his burst damage based on his max HP, and allows his skill and C2 Dendro sprites to generate a seamless shield when they hit enemies. This should also mean more Dendro damage from the seamless shield mechanics. Overall, his C6 stacks nicely with his C1 and C2 to generally enhance his Dendro damage and application potential. His Constellations generally add more instances of healing, Dendro application, and damage, although unless you're really investing in his damage, his numbers likely won't be a lot to begin with. His C1 is a nice quality of life constellation and a decent early stopping point as it can help his energy generation be more flexible, but it is by no means necessary to pull for.
Life, death, and the world around us all follow a set of laws.
Now on to Baiju's artifact build, starting with his stats. It's first important to note his ER needs, as a lot of his utility comes from his burst and it has an 80 energy cost. The ER target can vary, mainly depending on how often he can use his skill in a rotation and if you have other means of generating energy for him. Here's a table for estimated ER targets based on his skill frequency per burst and his Dendro teammate, if any. Plus, I added a column considering an R1 prototype Amber passive. As always, these ER goals can vary according to Favonius users on the team, additional team equipment, number of enemies, etc. As for the artifact main stats, the most recommended combo is a full healer and shielder build where the goal is to stack as much HP as possible, have reliable burst uptime, and boost his A4 passive's reaction damage buff. That means an ER Sands and HP Goblet and Circlet. While a healing bonus Circlet is still technically viable, he still prefers HP for his other HP related functions. While the priority for his Sands is ER, there is a possibility to make it HP if his teammates have added energy generation, if he can use his skill twice in a rotation, and if he's C1, or if you've covered his ER needs through his weapon or his substats already. But for the generally recommended and safe route, use an ER Sands. For the substats, ER and HP are your main targets. Baizhu's support build is the best and easiest way to build him, since HP and ER pieces are quite common and it caters to his kit's purpose. However, if you want to lean into increasing his personal damage, then you can add EM, attack, damage bonus, and crit stats accordingly, whether from your piece's main stats or substats. You can also try hybridizing his build to have a balance of HP and damage related stats. I should warn you though that going all in to build his damage isn't as optimal, and it obviously sacrifices his healing, shielding, and buffing capabilities, but the option is there if you want it. Going to Baizhu's artifact sets, the main recommendations are supportive sets. The go-to choice is the 4-piece Deepwood to shred the enemy's Dendro resistance. It's a default in teams that mainly rely on Dendro damage. With Baizhu using this, your other units can focus on more offensive sets. Just remember that Baizhu's AoE application isn't that good, especially since his off-field shield attacks are single target and random. Against a few enemies, it's not really a problem, but if there are too many enemies, there's a bigger chance some may not have the effect applied or refreshed. If you plan to build Baizhu for damage, this is also the top option unless someone else is already using it. Next is the 4-piece Noblesse. This boosts his burst damage and gives a team-wide attack buff when he casts his burst. If someone else is already using Deepwood in the team, this can be a good alternative choice. Or if your team doesn't rely that much on Dendro damage, like an aggravate-focused team, then Noblesse might be more preferable. Another is the 4-piece Instructor. Its highest rarity is 4 stars, so it has a lower stat ceiling, but its 4-piece effect boosts EM, which is great when used in reaction teams. Since the user can only trigger it on field, it's easier to maintain its uptime in quick swap teams where Baizhu can switch in and reactivate it. Try to use a 5-star ER Sands to get the highest ER stat. 2 healing bonus sets are the 4-piece Ocean-Hued Clam and Maiden's Beloved. The Clam set adds physical damage pops based on its user's heals, though Baizhu's burst heals only the active character, so the bubble pops won't really do big numbers outside of his skill. The Maiden's Beloved gives maximum healing potential, but it may already be overkill. There are set options that can boost his damage. They're generally not as recommended, but if you ever want to use them, just remember that having a Deepwood user in the team is the top priority before considering such damage-focused sets on Baizhu. For 2-piece combos, he can choose between combos of HP, Emblem, and healing bonus sets to boost his support utility, whereas 2-piece sets of Deepwood, Noblesse, EM, or Attack will increase his personal damage. I should also warn players who might be thinking of using the 2-piece Retracing Bullite for his shield that shield strength isn't recommended on a support Baizhu, as it doesn't buff the shield for his teammates. I have a video that explains how the shield strength bonus works with the link in the description. Now for Baizhu's best weapon options. Let's start with the free-to-play choices. I'll list their benefits on screen for brevity, but in general, my top recommendation is the Prototype Amber since it synergizes perfectly with his kit. It gives him HP, adds more team-wide healing, and most importantly, has a flat energy generation mechanic to help with his high burst cost. For Gacha 4 stars, there are 2 good support weapons to choose from, the Favonius Codex, which eases his energy needs and batteries the team, and the Sacrificial Fragments, which can reset his skill cooldown for more Dendro application and particles, though you'd want R4 or R5 on the Sac Frag so it can proc every rotation. Finally, the 5-star options, and there are 2 that best synergize with his support kit. The Jadefall Splendor is his best in-slot weapon since it gives a lot of HP and regenerates flat energy, thereby helping his energy needs. It also boosts elemental damage bonus based on the user's HP. Despite being his best in slot, remember that Prototype Amber shares many of its functions without costing any Primo Gems. Another is the infamous donut, the everlasting moonglow, which has finally found another potential user. However, it's only really maximized if Baizhu is played as an on-field driver, since it has normal attack-related buffs. If you play Baizhu off-field, then it's mainly an HP and healing bonus stat stick. If you're building him for damage, you can go for damage-focused options that you'd typically put on DPS catalyst units. However, the weapons I discussed are his generally recommended options for a support build.
I treat everyone fairly, and I do my best to heal them. You are no exception either.
Finally, let's cover his team comps and synergies. Again, to summarize his role as an off-field Dendro support, he mainly consolidates healing, shielding, continuous Dendro application, and damage buffing to Dendro-based reactions. If used on-field, he can do all of the previous things while also driving your team and applying Dendro with his catalyst attacks. The first template is a quicken team which consists of a Baizhu Electro core plus 2 flex slots. Additionally, a quicken team can also be modified by adding a compatible Hydro applicator in the third slot, turning it into a Quick Bloom team, which is a combination of Quicken and Hyper Bloom reaction damage. Baizhu's healing shielding consolidation adds more comping flexibility in such team templates, whether for quick swap focused teams or those with a long on-field unit. It's also possible to make Baizhu the main on-field unit, but since his catalyst attacks are quite single target, he performs best against single target scenarios, and if necessary, you can just compensate with another Dendro unit that gives more AoE application. As a highlight, Cyno benefits a lot from Baizhu, as he can provide healing, shielding, and application that can largely keep up with Cyno's field time. As Cyno players know, Nahida as a Cyno teammate can struggle in multi-wave scenarios, since switching to her to reapply Dendro can end his burst prematurely, while other teammates' Dendro application are also largely limited to circle impact. But with Baizhu, you can be more mobile and stay long on Cyno even with a new enemy wave. Cyno also gets to enjoy Baizhu's reaction damage buff, and if Cyno's particularly used in a Quick Bloom team, then his Hyper Bloom and Aggravate damage both get buffed, which is amazing synergy. Of course, these benefits also apply for other Electro on-field units, especially if they're squishy or hate getting interrupted, and are viable Quick Bloom DPSs like Yae or Lisa. Like many Quicken teams, it's also great to comp Baizhu with other Dendro units to unlock the Dendro resonance, have multiple spread reaction sources, and help with Baiju's energy needs. There are many options for Electro or Dendro DPSs and supports for making a Quicken or Quick Bloom team, and Baiju's flexibility gives him generally good synergy in such comps. Another template is a Bloom team with a Dendro Hydro core, which leaves room for 2 flex slots of Dendro, Hydro, Anemo, or Cryo to add freeze and turn it into a Fridge team. This also turns into a Hyper Bloom or Burgeon team by adding Electro or Pyro triggers respectively, leaving room for a flex slot. Baizhu can again be played on-field or off-field, and with Bloom and Burgeon teams, his shield will help you tank the reaction self-damage. In general, the biggest limitation in these teams will be his primarily single-target focused application, so in multi-target scenarios, you will likely want to comp a second Dendro that has AoE application. If you have enough freedom to switch between party members, try to switch to your reaction trigger teammates every now and then when Baiju's burst is active so that they can receive his A4 passive buff. For Neela's Bloom teams, Baiju's healing and shielding works wonders in helping provide a comfortable run despite the self-damaging Bloom explosions. We finally have our second Dendro healer to add to our options for Neelu teams, diversifying our healer options and adding more team variety. With quick swap rotations, Baizhu feels really great to play here. I can adapt him for either more or less on-field time, and for the most part, I can get 2 skills in per rotation, which helps nicely with his energy generation. More importantly, he does the job well of keeping the team alive. Again, it's highly recommended to have one more Dendro teammate that provides better AoE Dendro application and improves your Dendro core generation. But even without these team templates, if you're a fairly new player, Baizhu can simply slot in your team as a solid survival support and easy to play unit. He'll help you feel well and healthy throughout your journey in Teyvat. Just don't be surprised to hear a lot of coughing and some hissing too. To wrap up my thoughts, Baizhu is a great consolidation of several roles: healing, minor shielding, buffing, off-field Dendro application, and even the option for on-field driving. We already got some role consolidation through Yaoyao as a Dendro healer, and she definitely improved the flexibility of Dendro teams because of that. Yaoyao also has the benefit of not being totally burst dependent, and compared to Baizhu, perhaps has the upper hand in AoE Dendro application through her burst. But energy is something that can be compensated for, and Baizhu Baizhu still achieves his Dendro application well enough in combat scenarios with up to a few enemies while barely demanding any field time. All things considered, Baizhu is generally an upgrade to Yaoyao in many scenarios, and I think that's a good spot for a 5-star to be in terms of pull value, because players can very much get by with Yaoyao as a much more accessible option, and it will be up to them if the value he adds is worth the primos. Anyway, that's all for this guide on Dr. Baizhu. Since he was introduced to us long before he became playable, I'm curious to know in the comments what you think of him, and if he was worth the wait. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!
Don't worry. From this day on, I will take care of you.